talk through the what, why, and how of a universal basic income, and talk through some next steps about what we can all do to make it a reality in the UK. So the first 30 minutes of the event is going to be a panel conversation with me and two amazing panelists that I'll introduce in a second. I'll be asking our panelists some questions, but then the next 30 minutes are for questions from everyone watching at home. So if you want to ask our panelists a question for the second half of this event, please send an email at any point from now on to ubi@organize.org.uk. And if you can, share the link to this live stream with friends so more people can learn about universal basic income. So we've got two great panelists with us this evening, Michael and Jesse. Michael is the director and co-founder of the Basic Income Conversation, which is an organization that blends organizing, advocacy, and research to promote basic income in the UK. And Michael's role tonight is to help us understand the basics of a universal basic income. Michael's background is in community organizing, and he's worked on the living wage campaign for a long time. And last year, he traveled to the US, Canada, and India, and he visited different basic income pilots that have happened out there. And it's in Canada where he met our other panelist, Jesse, who is joining us from Ontario tonight. Thank you so much, Jesse, for making the time to join us. So Jesse was a participant in the Basic Income pilot in Ontario, in Canada. And she's also a photographer. And since she received a UBI herself, she's become a prominent basic income activist. And she is the person behind Humans for Basic Income, which is a photography project that promotes basic income. And Jessie is here tonight with us to share what it's like to get a basic income from her own perspective and talk about some of the impacts it could have on others. So before we start the panel, there's just a few things that I wanted to mention. The first is that the Basic Income Conversation, Michael's organization, have developed a toolkit to help people start talking about basic income in their own social circles, communities, or workplaces. And it would be great if we could all get a few friends together to start having these conversations in our own communities. And Basic Income Conversation are asking people who have joined this live stream to be some of the first people to test their conversation toolkit. And you can register to download the toolkit at a link which is available in the comment section of this live stream. The next thing is, obviously, if you would like to join the organized campaign on universal basic income, if you haven't already, there should be a link to the petition that you can sign in the comment section as well. We're also hosting a workshop next week or the week after with a smaller group of people to train people up to be advocates for UBI in their own communities. So if you're interested in that, you can email action@organize.org.uk and register your interest. And finally, we're also running this live stream in partnership with Economy, who are an incredible charity that support people to use economics to achieve what matters to them. And they do this because the economy plays a central role in our society. It shapes our health and well-being and the sustainability of our planet. And despite this, the vast majority of people feel like they are not equipped to have conversations about the economy like the one we're having this evening. So Economy help facilitate these kinds of conversations and help people feel empowered to talk about the economy. So if you would like to organize a conversation in your own community about the economy, you can email workshops@economy.org. That will also be in the chat to organize a conversation. That is all for introductions. Thank you so much. And we're now going to start the panel. And I'm going to talk to Michael first. So, Michael, hello.
Hello. Good to be here.
Could you, first of all, just tell us what is a universal basic income? What is it?
Okay, so it's a really simple idea. It is the idea of giving a regular cash payment to everybody forever. It's really as simple as that. We already have a basic income for most children and most pensioners in the form of child benefit and the state pension. And this is the idea of expanding that to every single adult in the country, regardless of your background, regardless of if you're in work or not. So it's kind of got 5 characteristics: that it's cash, it's regular, probably every week or every month. It goes to the individual, not the household. And it's unconditional, so there's no strings attached. You don't have to do anything in order to qualify for it. And it's universal, and it goes to everybody, and it's not means tested. And this would effectively become an income floor that nobody could fall below, but also a springboard for people to aspire to what they really want to be doing in life. So it's got a long history as an idea, but it's really based on the idea that we all have a right to some financial security, particularly at a time when so many of us are experiencing insecurity right now.
Sounds really good. And how much would people get?
That's always a question. How much cash are we talking? So there are different suggestions out there. There's higher and lower models in which you could do this, but most models suggest of a basic income somewhere between £250 and £500 per month. And that would, as I said, be this income floor that would sit below the rest of the existing welfare system. So even at that modest level, it's not enough to live on its own, but even at that modest level, it would reduce poverty by 1/3, would significantly reduce inequality. And for a couple with 2 children, for example, that's more than 10 grand a year, which is a life-changing amount of money.
Thank you. And, obviously, some people need this life-changing amount of money more than others. So do you think it should go to everyone? And why should it go to everyone, if so?
Yes. So as I said, it's universal. So it would go to everybody. And that would be, in effect, every resident or every citizen in the country. And that would, including children as well, probably be slightly lower amount. And the reason why that's important is that we're all citizens, we're all residents in the same country, we're all part of and contribute to the same thing, and therefore we all deserve some level of financial security in return. And the problem at the moment is that we have a system that tries to target support to those that so-called need it most. But so often is the case is that targeting means that the government misses, and lots of people who need financial security don't get it. For example, the 3 million people at the moment who've been excluded from the government's current measures in response to coronavirus. And so this would become really the fairest and simplest way of getting people financial security quickest.
I think that's a really good point. I think we've seen through this crisis that, the more you target, the more you miss people out. So thanks for that. And do you think, is the aim to eventually replace benefits? Does it replace benefits straight away? How does it interact with the system that we have now?
Yeah, so it's not designed to entirely replace the welfare system. Much of it, of course, which we've organised and fought for over many decades to secure. And it's not designed to replace it. Instead, it's an idea that would strengthen it. As I said, it would be this solid floor upon which you could build additional support for people who have extra needs. So, for example, disability benefit or housing benefit or carers allowance that you would build on top of the basic income. So it wouldn't be that basic income figure wouldn't be the only amount of money that people would get.
Cool, that makes sense. Yeah. And what kind of problems do you think a basic income solves that, like, for instance, our current system doesn't address? Why do we need it? Why do we need it now?
Well, there's lots of reasons for basic income, but I think the most powerful, particularly at the moment, is it's a direct challenge to the insecurity that we now face. People are insecure in their work, in our mental health. Many of us are experiencing debt. And this is being driven by this very uncertain, unstable climate in our politics, which just feels crazy at the moment. And the systems which used to be there that were designed to catch us when we fall, they're broken and don't really meet the changing patterns of work for the 21st century. And I think The other problem that it addresses, and I think perhaps the biggest and most important one really, is that the hardest and most valuable work in society, like parenting children or looking after loved ones when they're sick, is currently valued at zero by the market and the state. And basic income enables us to reimagine what it means, what work means, what contribution means in society. And I think coronavirus has highlighted that insecurity and what's really the most important work in society, and rewarding that would be easier through a basic income. And so, yeah, basic income really offers that floor of security for us all. And with security, that gives us something stable for us to stand on, for society to stand on, and builds resilience so that we can recover from this crisis and build back better.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that, you know, it's difficult to even imagine. I think having seen this crisis and how much crucial work is undervalued, I think this is like such an interesting solution to that issue, because at the moment the system is so skewed in favor of some types of work which are not necessarily the most socially valuable. And how would this work in practice? Like, do we have the systems necessary? How would it, if we had basic income, what I wake up tomorrow and how does it work?
So from an individual perspective, it would work in the form that you would open your bank account and you would see every week or every month you would get your basic income, and you would be free to spend that as you wish. There's no requirements on how you would spend that. And how it would also work is that, because even if you are insanely wealthy, I'm not sure if there's any billionaires on the call this evening, but they would also get a basic income, but they would be taxed back. So that, yes, that they would get it, but they would in effect give it straight back and more through tax. So that's kind of how it would work in practice for both the individual and for the wider network of how it would work.
Great. Yeah, because they've kind of been, I mean, throughout this crisis, I guess we've seen some examples of how it could work. You know, in the US, they didn't have very solid support, but everyone just got a check in the mail one time for $1,200. So I guess, you know, it's definitely workable. And in this country, I mean, what political support is there for this? We've seen in a lot of other countries, actually, there's been pilots popping up as a response to this. But what about our government? How feasible do you think this is?
Well, the government, as I think we're all aware, we're not getting a UBI at the moment. They've not backed the idea so far. Instead, looking to kind of strengthen the universal credit system, despite all of its faults that we know. But we have seen the political support for basic income grow at an incredible rate over the last few years, not just since the pandemic. So the Liberal Democrats recently became the second major party to fully back basic income, joining the Green Party, who have supported it for a long time. The Scottish National Party in Scotland also back a basic income, and the Scottish government has been exploring what pilots could look like there. It is pilots that the Labour Party backed at the last manifesto, at the last general election, and a number of Labour-led councils across the country have backed pilots in different cities. Plaid Cymru in Wales also backed the Labour calls for basic income pilots in the Welsh Senedd. There's a lot of support for it in Northern Ireland, with a number of parties proposing pilot schemes there. And there's a cross-party working group of politicians from across parliaments and parties across the UK who are working collaboratively to try and promote this. So actually there's a lot of political energy for this. There's a lot of excitement, and beginning to see what a kind of coalition would look like. And the important thing to say is this is not really a left or a right issue. This is kind of something that has arguments on all sides of the political spectrum, and potentially something that, you know, can move us away from the sort of left, right, good, bad thing, and move us forward with just good ideas.
Sounds like there's quite a lot of energy at the local level, and at least a lot of opportunities to build on that strength for pilots, and then hopefully build up to the national level. And so I guess kind of like a roundup question, Michael. I mean, it's a great idea. I love it. But do you think it's really possible? Can we do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I must admit, when I first heard about the idea, I was like, oh, surely this isn't possible. It sounds amazing. But the more you read about it, the more you realize that, yes, this really is possible. And some actually, not just possible, some even say this is probably inevitable at some point. It's just a case of how quickly we can bring this in. The political will, as I said, is growing. More and more people are realizing the benefit that this could have. And I think the pandemic has kind of brought that home to many people. And the international evidence is growing. We can now point to a number of pilots that have happened around the world, not in a whole country, but in localized areas in different countries. And they're beginning to show the impact that could have. And it's people like Jessie, who we're going to hear from, who are living proof of the impact that it could have and how it would work.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks for talking us through some of these. We're going to have questions from the audience, I'm sure, in a minute. But first, let's talk to Jessie, who is actually a recipient of basic income. Hey, Jessie.
Hi, good to be here. Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for joining us from Ontario.
Thank you.
So, Jessie, I mean, you have actually received a basic income. This dream has been a reality for you. Can you tell us a bit about your experience in the pilot in Ontario? How did the pilot happen in your area? How did you hear about it? And what was it like being a part of it?
So the pilot was introduced by a Liberal government and it, under a premier named Kathleen Wynne. And it was supposed to be a 3-year pilot that was going to take place in 4 cities in Ontario. My own city where I live, Hamilton, and then 3 other cities, Brantford, Lindsay, and Thunder Bay. And they were all kind of targeted as they're all really unique cities that have different sets of challenges in terms of income insecurity and poverty. And I heard about it. I heard about the pilot. I was literally just on my phone one day, you know, scrolling through social media and saw an article on the news about this basic income pilot and how they're rolling it out, and how it like the only qualifying factors was that you needed to be residing in one of those cities and living below the poverty line, which in Canada is $30,000 a year. And so I qualify for both of those factors. So I was like, I'm doing this. Like, let's sign up. I remember talking to my roommate about it, and both of us just being like, well, why wouldn't we do this? Like, let's just go. So we attended an information session and signed up for the pilot. So I signed up in December of 2017. And then I found out I got on the pilot in February of 2018. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell us a bit more about, I mean, what was your life like before you got a place on the UBI pilot, and how did it change as a result of getting that place?
So before basic income, like many people in my generation and many people in like where I live, I had multiple jobs. I had 4 jobs at that point in time. So I was working like 60 to 80-hour work weeks, and all of these jobs were like minimum wage, low income work, contract work. So no protections, no benefits, no sick leave or anything like that. And then also, like, you know, they could just say, you know, my contract won't be renewed, and that would be it. And so I was basically like the gig economy, like so many people I know. So it was a very exhausting existence. And like my home was basically my place where I would shower and sleep. Like I didn't even have time to make dinner. It was really an exhausting existence. And despite all of this work, I was still just barely scraping by, still living paycheck to paycheck. And I was trying to like build a business. Like I wanted to be a full-time photographer, and I couldn't do it because I just didn't have time to take the risk and work and build my business, because I needed to make money to pay rent. So it was a very stressful existence. And then being on basic income, I was able to drop down and quit all those jobs and focus exclusively on my photography business. And then what I was seeing was that my business was growing. I was actually making more money on my photography business than I was before, when I was cobbling together all those jobs. And I was like seeing my business grow to a point where I projected that if I would only have needed to been on the pilot for 2 out of the 3 years, because at that point I would have been making enough money that I wouldn't have needed to be on basic income anymore.
That's honestly, I think so many people listening will identify so strongly with what you've said. I think it's an increasingly common experience that people are juggling like 2, 3, 4 jobs that are also just like a way to survive and have nothing to do with your core strengths or the things you're really passionate about. And it's a really tough existence. And it's so good to hear that there is a world beyond this and there is something we could be doing differently. And I guess, I mean, as a result of your campaigning work, you've also photographed other people who have been on the pilot. Could you tell us a bit more about your photography project, how you came up with it, and then also if you could share some of your favorite stories of things that other people did with their basic income?
Yeah, so up until this point, my story sounds really happy. And unfortunately, my story is about to take a not so happy turn. Because, like I said, the pilot was brought forward by a liberal government led by Kathleen Wynne. And then there was an election, and a conservative government was elected. And the premier is a guy named Doug Ford. And Doug Ford, we like to think of him as the Canadian Donald Trump. His brother was, you may have heard of his brother. He gained worldwide notoriety for smoking crack. He was the crack smoking mayor of Toronto. This is the premier of Ontario. Yeah, I love him very much, as you can tell. But anyway, he had gone on the record numerous times promising and saying he wouldn't cancel the basic income pilot. But then, of course, he got elected, and the very first thing he did was cancel the basic income pilot. So no, I'm not a full-time photographer, because like the day he canceled the pilot was the day I put my business on the shelf. And my project was born out of fury, like hell hath no fury, like a photographer scorned. And I did the pilot because I wanted Doug Ford to know my name. I wanted people to know what he took away, and I want him to know what happened. So I started finding all these other basic income recipients. I started putting calls out on social media and Facebook. I went to a protest at the Ontario Legislative Assembly where the Parliament sits, and took pictures of people there. And immediately, like it was like the portraits just kind of snowballed and went viral on me. And I was able to get photos from all the cities. And like geographically, Ontario is huge. So like these cities are very, very spread out. Like Hamilton is very close to Toronto, but the city of Thunder Bay is a 17-hour drive north of that. So yeah, like I said, Canada is geographically a large country, and Ontario is huge. So I was able to get up to Thunder Bay and take pictures of people there. And then I started just exhibiting the portraits and got thrown into this world. I can do share screen right now, and I can share some of the portraits if you like. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I am going to do that. So, what am I looking for? This is what I'm looking for. Sorry, I'm talking to myself.
And how long was it before they canceled the pilot? Sorry. How long did it last?
The pilot was about a year into going on, but it was a rolling out process. So like I said, I applied in December of 2017. I got the money. I got approved in February of 2018, and then they made the cancellation on July of 2018. And then the last payment came out. They didn't announce the last payment for a while. And that was really scary. Like all they said is we're going to compassionately wind down the pilot. But we're all sitting there being like, there's nothing compassionate about this. And like, is my next month's payment going to come in? I'm depending on this. I signed a lease for an apartment. I'm going to school. I put a down payment on this. Like so many people do that. And then all of a sudden to have that guarantee just ripped out for no reason, like really threw people's lives into disarray. So yeah, can you see my share screen?
I can see it, yeah. I think everyone can.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I just to show you some of these pictures. So this is actually a friend of mine, Sarah. She lives like not very far from me at all, and her and I like we go out for coffee sometimes. And she was working as an osteopath doctor, or she was going to school for that. And while she was going to school, in order to pay for school, she was working as a bartender at a really sketchy bar. That's like, you know, the police had to be called often. It was a dangerous place, a lot of drunk people at night. Like, so she's at this bar working, you know, all hours of night, into the middle of the night, and then she's up early, going to school, basically studying to be a doctor. And so basic income enabled her to reduce her hours working at the bar, focus more on her studies, and now she's working as a full-time therapist in our community and working downtown. And she is a full-time osteopathic doctor, and basic income allowed her to do that. This
That's
is Dan
incredible.
and Justine. Yeah, it is. Yeah, and just like such a positive impact. So yeah, this is Dan, Justine, their daughter Julia, and in this picture, Justine's pregnant. Justine's not pregnant anymore. They have now a little toddler named Orion. He's really cute. And they say that the basic income program helped us move to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood and feel financially secure enough to go back to school to get a better job. And like where they were living before, I know because they're good friends of mine as well. I've been to their old house, and I've been to their new house, and their old house like backed up into an alleyway, and their daughter wasn't allowed to play in their backyard because there were drug deals and gang activity in the alleyway. So it was like literally dangerous. So they were able to move into a safer neighborhood, have a baby, and now they're in a place with a backyard where their kids can go outside and play. And they're in a safer neighborhood now. And Dan went to school and is now running his own business. Like, again, another positive impact. This is not such a positive impact. This is Tim. Basic income helps me stay healthy with good food. I am ill. Tim, he was, I believe it was a workplace injury. So he was on what is called the Ontario Disability Support Program, which is our social service for disabled people, and it is woefully inadequate. Like the amount that they get per month is just pitifully small, barely enough to live off of, less than what the market rate for rent is. And if they make any money at all or anything at all, it gets clawed back. Like, it's a very dehumanizing system. And so seeing Tim on basic income, his life just improved dramatically. And you can see a physical transformation, but then the pilot got canceled and you saw another physical transformation, which was going back into poverty and what happens there. And that was just absolutely heartbreaking. And this is another one. Michael Hampson on basic income since January 2018. It changed my life, gave me back my dignity and faith in my community. ODSP, or Ontario Disability Support, chained me in poverty, causing high stress and poor nutritional opportunities. Basic income it isn't basic. It's many layered and healing for recipients in our community. Stand with us. And Michael was a really strong advocate for people with disabilities. He's wheelchair bound, and he would do these things called crawl-ins, where at demonstrations he would crawl out of his wheelchair and crawl up to the podium to make a statement about the barriers that people with disabilities face. And I remember I took this picture, and in this picture he looks very clean and he's wearing clean clothing. Like, this was just when the basic income pilot got canceled. He looks happy, he looks healthy. And I kind of asked him, because he has like this smile in this picture, and I was like, why are you smiling? Like, you should be pissed. And he's like, oh, he said he was, but he just had like this like kind of quiet hope and optimism that it's going to be okay and we're going to win this fight. But then I also saw like that same physical transformation back into poverty. And the last time I saw Michael, I remember feeling very worried about him because his clothing was not clean. His hair was long and scraggly. He looked dirty. He looked unhealthy. He looked that hopeful optimism in his eyes was gone, and he looked stressed and depressed. And I was really worried about him. I remember feeling very worried about him. And my fears were founded because he died in January, just this year. He died last January. And you know, I would rather my taxpayer money pay for Michael to be alive. And I believe that if the basic income pilot hadn't been canceled, Michael would still be here and he'd still be alive, and that the devastation of losing the pilot was just that was it. That was it for him. And that just makes me so unbelievably heartbroken and angry that had to happen. Yeah, so I just stop sharing for now. But yeah, those are some of the photos that and I my goal when I started the portrait series was 50 photos, and I was able to get 70 photos of recipients.
This is honestly, thank you so much for sharing. I think I speak for everyone watching that, like, it just makes it feel so much more real to look at people's faces and hear their stories. And I feel very moved by this. And I think it's also striking, when you're speaking about how many similarities there are actually between our two countries and systems, because so much of what you're saying about, the current social safety net being inadequate, people having to work multiple jobs, people who don't have family wealth having to work the whole night just to go to school in the morning, all of these things, are things that we share. And it's incredible to hear that for these people, a basic income really made a difference. And I think, it shows that it could really make a difference here too. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was really, really, I really found that incredibly moving.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think we are now kind of on track to, I have one more question for you, and then we'll get to two questions from the audience, because we have quite a lot of great questions from people as well. So
I can imagine
that I wanted to ask, and I guess you kind of touched on that a little bit at the end, but I just wanted to say, how do you feel now? Obviously, this happened in 2018. You've been campaigning for a basic income since. Do you feel hopeful about the future? Do you feel like we can win this back? And also, what do you think people watching at home can do to help build that power and that community that will help us win change like this?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I feel incredibly privileged to be able to be in this position and to have this voice and to speak about it in such a way. And it's been 2 years, and I honestly thought that this project would last a couple of weeks, and then it would just sort of fade away, and I would get back to my life and everything. And 2 years later, here I am still talking about it, and I'm very thankful and happy, and that gives me hope and gives me optimism that this conversation is just not going away, and it is still incredibly relevant. And especially now with the pandemic, it's been more relevant than ever. In Canada, we had the Canada Economic Relief Benefit, which is now turned into the Canada Relief Benefit. And it was a payment of $2,000 a month for Canadians who lost their income due to the pandemic. So a lot of Canadians relied on that. And we kind of saw this as a form of basic income. And then people start asking, well, why don't we make it a form of basic income? Would we not have been more weathered to prepared to handle this pandemic if we had this in place already? And also seeing how this saved the economy from a complete and total utter disaster. And we're seeing you see other countries like the United States who just got a single stimulus check, and I'm sitting there wondering, how the hell are these people alive? And I don't know, quite frankly, that country scares me right now. But yeah, no, I am hopeful. I think that we're the world is changing, and we're on this way to building a better world, and there's so many things happening, like climate change, technology and automation, the pandemic, which has sort of exposed these cracks in our society and exposed that the current economic system that we've been living under no longer works, and no longer works for everybody. And would it not be better for everyone, all of us as a society, if we're all succeeding? Poverty costs Canada and costs Ontario specifically $38 billion per year. And that's in the healthcare costs, in hospital beds for people who are sick with preventable diseases that are due to poverty, or in the costs of the justice system, and people because poverty and crime are so closely related. And can we not save that and invest in humans and give them the opportunity to pursue their dreams, and can that not have economic benefit? Like, had the basic income pilot had been allowed to see itself to the end, I would be a full-time photographer right now, very, very, very much out of the poverty line, benefiting the economy, you know. And more people, like, everybody would be doing that. And a lot of people, like, I think that myth about the bootstraps mentality is people are realizing how much of a myth that is, and people are realizing that, you know, it isn't just, you know, work hard and you'll be good. Like, it's that if you invest in humans, then people can pursue their dreams. And there, in terms of like how to get involved, there are so many resources. There's so many networks and groups, like you know, like the amazing work that Michael is doing, and like in the UK, and then so many other groups that you can get involved with. The Basic Income Earth Network. I know in Canada there's several different groups, and I'm involved in a bunch of them. I sit on the Basic Income Hamilton Steering Committee, and I, like, you know, try to organize and work with other groups as well. So there's people and resources to get involved with. There's that toolkit that you talked about at the beginning that I'm sure has resources. People are more than welcome to share my photos. Please use them. I treat them like public domain because I think that there's a power in storytelling that conveys a message that numbers and statistics can't necessarily. Yeah, and like, you know, always feel free, like, you know, I'm very approachable if people want to contact me or email me or ask like how to get involved. Like, I'm always happy to point people in different directions, offer them resources, and show them like to different people and documents and articles that point out and show how this works and how it can work. Yeah, the movement is small, but it is growing, and it's exciting to be in the movement. It's exciting to be privileged enough to have a voice in this movement, and also to just think about like, we can change the world. We can build a better world. We can change history. And that's the side of history I want to be on. And it's exciting.
Thank you so much, Jessie. I also think, you know, one interesting point to end this on is that I recently learned from AOC that the phrase pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is actually supposed to be a joke because it's supposed to demonstrate that it's impossible to do that. Like,
oh my gosh, I love AOC. Yes, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense because, yeah, it's literally, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You need some support. This could be the support we need. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are now going to turn to some questions from our wonderful audience. People have a lot of questions. Thanks to everyone watching for being so involved. We won't have time to get through all these questions tonight, but I'll try to do as many as possible. So one group of questions we had is basically about kind of the potential drawbacks or the challenges of basic income. So I'll try to cover a few of those first. One question we had was that basically, if a universal basic income is not enough to live on straight away, then isn't it actually going to increase poverty? How does it decrease poverty if it's kind of too small at the beginning? Michael, do you want to maybe touch on that?
Yeah, sure. So absolutely, basic income on its own wouldn't be enough to live on, and that's why, you know, it would just be a basis, a regular amount of money that can at least you can guarantee is coming into your account every week or every month. And on top of that, you'd either be able to, you know, work and get paid as you would currently, or, you know, there would be additional support if those that need it most. But I think this idea that you know, that at the moment we currently have such huge gaps in the system, and this would basically plug that gap. So at least nobody would have literally nothing. And that's so important at the moment, where everybody is suddenly realizing this pandemic. They've looked and found that they're standing on almost nothing in terms of income, and there's been no safety net for people. So this would just kind of repair that net and make it a floor that you can at least stand on, and then go out and, you know, get money elsewhere if needed.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think, you know, even if it doesn't solve poverty on its own, if it prevents the situation that we've had in the last 6 months where some people just fall through the cracks of targeted support and suddenly are left with nothing, that's already a very good step forward. So another question we had is kind of in general concerns about The fact that it doesn't, yeah, I guess this is similar, but it doesn't target those that need it the most. So kind of why should rich people get it? Is it not a better way of kind of targeting people who need support and just giving it to those people?
But do you want me to take this? I mean, yeah, I mean, if there's a better way, then let me know. But the current system doesn't do that, and so the current system tries to get money to people who so-called need it most. And I think what we've found is that just doesn't work. It's just excluded so many people from this and left people with almost no income coming in. And so, yes, like this would be a more efficient, simple way. The government would find it very difficult to screw it up just giving everybody the same amount of money. And I think what this crisis also shows is that people who were perhaps previously well off before the crisis, they might have been homeowners or business owners, self-employed, doing quite well for themselves, and then suddenly this strikes. And so, yes, they do deserve it, and we all deserve some financial security. And the very richest would pay it back in tax anyway. So I think it's just a more fair and efficient way of doing it.
Thanks so much. And one more question on similar vein. So some people are worried that if you give people a basic income, say we give people £60 a week, employers will just pay people £60 less a week, or landlords will charge £60 more a week. And it'll have no net effect on people's situation. I mean, I guess, Jesse, you've kind of lived this. And also, Michael, you probably know some of the theories. So what about this idea that if you just give people more money, suddenly the market adapts and no one is better off?
I kind of saw that, like, when you have a basic income, you kind of have a little bit more power to be able to decide what kind of work you want to do, and what kind of like have a little bit more autonomy and rights with your working, which kind of puts the onus on employers to make their jobs better. And pay better and do better. Like, there was a lot of there was a lot of people complaining in Canada that like people like grocery store workers and minimum wage workers didn't want to return to their jobs because if they stay on the Canada Economic Relief Benefit, they're making more money. But they're only making $2,000 a month. So then why would they take a pay cut, put themselves at risk in the middle of a pandemic and make less money? So it's like, well, why don't you just pay your staff better? You can. You're a multi-million-dollar corporation. You're Walmart. You're the grocery store is called Loblaws. You can do this. You're multi-billionaires. Like, can you not make it better? And if we have like that kind of financial floor to be able to pursue our dreams and do what we want to, then we can demand better, I think.
Yeah, I would add, this doesn't replace like good minimum wage, or in my, I used to work on the living wage campaign. There should be, we should have a living wage in this country, and that doesn't stop. Basic income doesn't replace that, or as Jesse says, it actually helps us organize and have the capacity to say no to exploitation and to be able to organize ourselves to campaign for better issues elsewhere. So, and really the inflation argument. Doesn't really, the evidence hasn't really stood up when it's been tested.
I think that's such a good point. Like just being able to say no to things is such a huge power that I think so many people are missing right now, where they just have to accept any work, any accommodation, anything, because they don't have the power to say no to anything, and that would be an incredible thing to gain. So the next batch of questions is kind of more about the practicality. So, like, how, if we were to introduce basic income in the UK and Canada, just in general, how long do you think it should last? Should it just be like a crisis measure, or should it be kind of longer term?
I would love to see a permanent basic income. That's what I want. Just all in, all going, and there has been a lot of political talk about it in Canada. Like the Canadian Senate is very, very much on board with the idea of a guaranteed livable income. as well as the majority of the major Canadian political parties. I think the only exception is the Conservative Party, have all come out publicly saying that they are for a basic income or are in discussions of a basic income. And right now, like in Canada, at least, like, you know, if there are talks, the talks are kind of like, well, do we do a pilot or do we do a permanent income? And I would love to see a permanent income, but at this point, I will take whatever I can get. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we should be looking for a permanent one, but if a pilot or for example, in the UK, there's been a bit of a talk of a recovery basic income that could kick in perhaps for a few months or a year throughout the crisis, and that would be welcome. I think this needs to be a pivot to a more permanent system.
Great, thank you. And how would a scheme like this reach people who might not have, for instance, like a bank account, or might not, you know, the government might not have their records? How is a scheme like this going to reach everyone? Michael, maybe you want to touch on that.
Yeah, well, Jesse might have a practical example of how they managed to do this in the pilot in Ontario. It's a really important question because actually a surprisingly high number of people don't have a bank account, at least in the UK. So this is a real question actually for how do you get cash to people quickly. So there's been talk about how you could use perhaps the post office, for example, to get cash to people, or on prepaid cards. If anyone uses like kind of Monzo or Starling, those kind of new fintech banks, you could kind of put it on a prepaid card for people. I know that's how they've been doing it in the Stockton pilot in California. So there are innovative ways to do this. And it's a really important question because financial exclusion is a really big issue in the UK.
Yeah, I believe Give Directly with their basic income pilots in Kenya and Uganda do a similar thing with the prepaid cards. In Ontario, at least for me, I know it was direct deposit into my bank account. But if you didn't have direct deposit set up, then you would receive a check in the mail. But I saw the same problems in Canada. And I remember when I signed up for the basic income pilot, like you signed up and you had to provide like your most recent tax records and documents and to show your income and everything and banking information, all that. And I thought to myself, this is a barrier. You know, I find this difficult. If I find this difficult, like somebody else who is in worse circumstances than me will find this more difficult or impossible. I don't know if I have an answer to that, like how to distribute the money better. I wish these systems were better. I wish they were all automated, honestly. Yeah.
But I guess this is kind of a question that, you know, it's not just about basic income. Like, the fact that we can't reach these people is a problem in general. The fact that we don't have systems to reach these people is a problem we need to solve anyway. Yeah. So, this would just be one way to start working on solving it. And I guess the final kind of big group of questions that people have and that is often cited as a point against basic income is that it's just, yeah, it would be great. Wouldn't it be great to just give everyone money? But it's way too expensive. We can't afford it. How would we ever pay for it? So, how would we pay for it? How are we going to do this?
Well, from a UK perspective, it's kind of helpful to think about in two ways. So one would be a more progressive tax system, which would basically see the richest pay a lot more in tax, and that would basically redistribute income in this country. The second way is kind of evenly sharing out things that we all have a stake in. So, for example, natural resources that we should kind of all own, our data that we all own, and the idea behind that would be that you evenly distribute that out in the form of a basic income. So, for example, in Alaska, they actually have a basic income, have done for a number of decades now, where they evenly distribute out the profits from their oil every year, and they give that back to every resident of Alaska in the form of a basic income. So it's kind of, you could maybe blend those two ideas, but that's broadly how you'd pay for it in the UK. And I should finally say that, you know, I think it sounds like a lot of money, but when you factor in some of the changes to the tax system, this is absolutely affordable. You are talking about kind of the same amount of money that would have basically that's been cut really from the welfare system over the last 10 years under austerity, and you're talking about similar numbers to what's been spent in some of the other coronavirus packages that the government has spent. And I saw that in the chat, kind of the comment section, kind of comparing how this could have actually given a basic income to people. So it's not as much as people think.
Yeah, like there's an organization in Canada called UBI Works, and they actually sourced out several ways to pay for a basic income that would only take up less than 2% of the total wealth in Canada and just over 8% of Canada's GDP. And none of the ways that they have sourced out to pay for a basic income involve income tax. So when people are like, I don't want my taxpayers paying for money, like, we're not talking about your money. We're talking about land value tax, which is sort of what Michael was saying. And there's an author, Guy Standing, and his book, The Plunder of the Commons, sort of talks about the same thing, about how, like, we're all entitled to that same collective profit off of the collective resources of humanity. The idea of corporations and economic activity paying more, especially with automation, replacing workers, higher income earners paying more. And also like taxing environmental degradation, and taxing like the cost of the climate and cost of the environment. So there's several ways to do this. It's very possible, and they're like I have the resources and the statistics of how to do it in Canada, and I'm sure that these same sort of things can be applied across the country. But there are economists out there better than me, and to be honest, I failed economics 101, yet here I am talking about a niche economic issue. So it really shows you can do anything if you put your mind to it.
I just want to add one thing, is that it's also the cost of not doing this is huge.
Yes.
The cost of poverty, the cost on our criminal justice system, the cost on our NHS, are extraordinarily high. And if what the pilot suggests in terms of the reduction in crime, the improvement of health, the improvement of mental health, the reduction in poverty, if those things kind of pull through, then you begin to get to a point where you can see this is almost paying for itself. So I think that's really important to highlight. Of the cost of not acting right now is enormously expensive, not just in terms of pounds, but in also quite literally in costing lives at the moment.
That's such a good point, because I guess, going back to what you said earlier, Jesse, you said if you had received this for even 2 out of 3 years, it would have helped you kind of pull you out from above the poverty line and kind of like increase your contributions so much economically, improve your well-being, just everything. And if you think about that on a national scale, with all of these big social issues that we're facing, there's always the question of like, oh, well, how are we going to pay for it? And if you think about how much money we've spent just this year on this pandemic, which has not necessarily been well targeted or well spent, and if you think about the climate crisis, if you think about inequality, these long-term issues we're facing, the more we try to like scrimp and save on addressing them, the more we end up paying absurd sums of money in the end to not even really solve the problem. So if this is actually going to solve the problem, then it's probably worth the investment, right? I guess one last question is around pilots. So obviously there's been some pilots, but I don't think that any country has fully implemented this yet. Do either of you want to talk about kind of how the pilots have gone, what they've shown, and why maybe they haven't been turned into permanent measures yet, and how we can kind of facilitate that transition? Ooh.
Yeah. So there's been several pilots over the last half a century. Ironically enough, basic income was actually really popular in the 70s. In the province of Manitoba in Canada, there was a basic income pilot that took place in the 70s in a village just outside of Winnipeg called Dauphin. And what they found in that pilot, the pilot, much like Ontario, got prematurely canceled. All of the data got put into boxes and left in a storage unit for years and years and years and years. And then about a decade ago, an economist named Evelyn Forget, she decided to dig out all that data and do the research. And what she found was that high school rates, like high school dropout rates reduced, hospitalization rates reduced very, very sharply. The entire economy of the whole town improved significantly, and people are still feeling those effects today. Yeah, like and there's been several other pilots, like there was one a few years ago in Finland. There's one that Michael just referenced in Stockton, California. There's pilots in India, Germany, Kenya, Uganda. There's basic income programs in different forms, which Michael also said earlier too, like child benefit programs or programs for seniors that are in like sort of semi like permanent forms of basic income that several countries have. And like there have been research done on these pilots, and one of the more interesting papers I've read about it was specifically about the motivation to work or a disincentive. Like if you have a basic income, are you not just going to sit on your ass and play video games all day? And so they looked at all these pilots and they looked at all these programs, and this is like the hugest control group ever. We're talking about people from all over the world, different countries, and receiving different amounts of money for different periods of time. But the answer was pretty consistent in that people either worked more or the amount of work stayed the same. The only people that worked less were people who were stay-at-home parents or caring for like an elderly or disabled or like a dependent, or people who went back to school. That was like everybody else either worked more or the same. And so that's also like, you know, that also really, again, quells that whole bootstraps myth, and you just got to work hard to get yourself out of poverty. And just the amount of people that I have encountered that still believe that, despite like the glaring statistical evidence and economic evidence and psychological and the data that's right there that proves that the opposite is true. And if you give somebody an opportunity to pursue their dreams, they will. And like, if there are people who sit on their ass playing video games, like that's okay. But you know, your existence is going to be like on basic income. You're going to only be able to afford to live in your mom's basement and eat ramen all day. So like, if you want that life, have at it. I don't care. But most people don't do that. They just don't.
Yeah, definitely. I think like the pilots show two things, I think, over and over again. It's about health that Jesse talked about and debunks that myth about work. But what kind of to answer why the pilots haven't translated into them becoming permanent, I think at key junctures over the last few decades, there's been moments of crisis and shocks like the one that we're experiencing now. And for whatever reason, governments haven't picked this up as an idea. And I think partly that reason is because there hasn't been like a bit of a movement behind these ideas. They've often been, as Jesse said, these have been tucked away in academic departments. There've been lots of economists and professors talking about it, but not really ordinary people like us on the call this evening. I think what's really different this time is that you're seeing a movement in this country growing really, really fast across the world. And I think this time, the response to this shock is another opportunity to change the system. And I think that's why we're so interested in the work of Organise and as I said, the toolkits that we're producing to start to get people active in this movement. And there's some great organisations like Basic Income UK and UBI Lab Network and Citizens Basic Income Network Scotland who are doing fantastic work to kind of turn this idea into a movement. And that's what everyone involved this evening's been talking about. I think that is what will change it from pilot into reality.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Michael and Jesse. This has been an incredible hour of conversation. I've definitely learned a lot. I hope everyone has found it useful. Unfortunately, we're already at the end of this, which feels extremely fast, but it's been an hour. So thank you so much for all of your incredible knowledge and comments. Thanks to everyone who joined this evening. This is just the beginning of our campaign for basic income. If you want to get more involved in the campaign, there's many things you can do. As I mentioned, Basic Income Conversation, Michael's organization, are launching a conversation toolkit where you can use this to start conversations with your friends, your family, your community about a basic income and start popularizing that idea in your networks. You can also sign the organized petition on a basic income, and we'll be emailing you regular updates on ways to get involved with the campaign. We'll be hosting a workshop in the next couple of weeks to train people up as advocates for basic income. And you can also email economy at workshops@economy.org if you would like for Economy to host a workshop on economic empowerment with your friends in your community. So these are just some of the ways you can get involved. I really hope you enjoyed this evening, and I hope you found it useful, and I'm sure we'll all be in touch again soon. Thank you to Michael and Jesse, and thanks to all of you for joining.
Thank you.